The Valori Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever dared to refuse them. Their ships were massive beyond imagination, dark mountains of metal that could block out the light of suns when they gathered in formation. Their armies numbered in the trillions, drawn from hundreds of conquered worlds. Their weapons could crack planets open like eggs and reduce entire civilizations to dust and memory. Emperor Keleth the Resplendent sat upon his throne of living crystal on the world of Valor Prime, surrounded by advisors and generals who had never known defeat. He was ancient by any measure, having ruled for 600 years, and his 4 golden eyes had watched countless species bend their knees before him. When his scouts discovered a new species in a distant arm of the galaxy, he felt only mild curiosity. These creatures called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star. They had only possessed the technology to travel between stars for 200 years, which made them infants by galactic standards. The Emperor summoned his chief ambassador, a tall and elegant Valori named Thresagon, and gave him simple instructions. "Go to these humans," the Emperor commanded, his voice echoing through the crystal halls of his palace. "Offer them the honor of joining our empire as a vassal state. Tell them they will serve us, pay tribute to us, and bow before our magnificence. And tell them that refusal is not an option." Thresagon bowed low and departed with a small fleet of diplomatic vessels. The journey to human space took several weeks through the hyperspace corridors that connected the Empire. When Thresagon finally arrived in the system the humans called Sol, he was not impressed by what he found. The human homeworld was a messy planet of blue oceans and green lands, with weather patterns that seemed chaotic and uncontrolled. Their space stations were crude constructions of metal and glass. Their ships were small and boxy, lacking the elegant curves of Valori design. Thresagon requested a meeting with human leadership, and he was directed to a military vessel called the TFS Defiance. This struck him as a bad omen, but he proceeded anyway. Admiral Elena Vasquez met him in a plain conference room aboard her ship. She was a small creature by Valori standards, with brown skin and dark hair streaked with gray, and eyes that held a strange intensity that Thresagon found slightly unsettling. He delivered his message with all the ceremony and grandeur he could muster. He spoke of the Empire's glory, its countless victories, its mastery over the forces of nature itself. He described the weapons that could shatter worlds and the fleets that could darken skies. He painted a picture of unstoppable power and inevitable triumph. "The Emperor offers you a great honor," Thresagon concluded. "You may become part of something greater than yourselves. You will serve the Empire, and in return, you will be protected and guided by our superior wisdom. All you must do is submit." Admiral Vasquez listened to everything without interrupting. When the ambassador finished speaking, she sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers steepled before her face. Then she smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had heard a joke that only she understood. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey that did not yet know it was being hunted. "Ambassador Thresagon," she said, her voice calm and steady, "I appreciate you coming all this way to deliver your message. Please tell your Emperor that we have considered his generous offer very carefully." She leaned forward in her chair. "Our answer is no." Thresagon's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession. He was not sure he had heard correctly. "I must have misunderstood," he said slowly. "Are you refusing the protection and guidance of the Valori Empire?" "That is exactly what I am doing," Vasquez replied. "Humanity does not kneel. We do not bow. We do not submit. These are not things we do, Ambassador. They are not in our nature." "You cannot be serious," Thresagon said, his voice rising with disbelief. "You are a small species with a tiny fleet and limited technology. The Empire has crushed civilizations 1,000 times more powerful than yours. You would be destroyed utterly. Perhaps, Vasquez said. Or perhaps not. Either way, we will not surrender our freedom without a fight. She stood and walked to the window of the conference room, looking out at the stars. Let me tell you something about humanity, Ambassador. We evolved on a dangerous world. Everything on our planet tried to kill us at some point. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even the planet itself. We survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and plagues that killed half our population. We fought wars against each other for 10,000 years, and each war made us stronger and more clever. She turned back to face him. We are not easy to kill, and we do not give up, ever. Your emperor may send his fleets and his armies. He may throw everything he has at us. But I promise you this, Ambassador. Whatever he sends, we will make him pay a price in blood and fire that he cannot imagine. Thresaken stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. No species had ever spoken to a representative of the Empire this way. It was madness. It was suicide. I have one more message for your emperor, Vasquez said. Tell him that if his ships enter Terran space with hostile intent, they will not leave it. Tell him that we are not afraid of his threats. Tell him that humanity stands ready to defend itself against any enemy, no matter how powerful they think they are. She smiled that unsettling smile again. And tell him that we are looking forward to showing him what humans can do. Thresaken returned to Valor Prime with the human's words burning in his mind. He delivered the message to Emperor Khalith exactly as it had been given to him, holding nothing back. The Emperor listened in silence, his golden eyes glittering with an emotion that might have been anger or might have been amusement. When the ambassador finished, the Emperor did something he had not done in over a century. He laughed. It was a cold and terrible sound that echoed through the crystal halls and made everyone present shiver with fear. The Emperor laughed until tears streamed from his 4 eyes, and then he composed himself and turned to his military commanders. These creatures are amusing, he said. They have spirit. I almost admire them. But spirit alone cannot stop the might of an empire. Send the 9th Expeditionary Armada to their little system. Teach them their place in the universe. And when you have broken them, bring their leaders to me in chains, so I may laugh at them in person. The commanders bowed and departed to carry out their orders. And so the war between humanity and the Valori Empire began. Grand Admiral Vorath had served the Empire for 300 years, and he had never lost a battle. He was a decorated warrior, a master strategist, and one of the most feared commanders in Valori space. His name alone had caused entire civilizations to surrender without firing a single shot. When the Emperor gave him command of the 9th Expeditionary Armada, he accepted the mission with confidence bordering on boredom. 800 warships assembled at the staging area near the border of Valori territory. They were massive dreadnoughts bristling with plasma cannons, sleek cruisers designed for rapid strikes, carriers loaded with thousands of fighter craft, and support vessels carrying supplies and troops. It was a force capable of conquering entire star systems, and it was being sent to crush a single primitive species. Vorath considered the mission beneath his dignity, but orders were orders. The Armada entered hyperspace and traveled through the network of corridors that connected the Empire. The journey took 12 days, and during that time, Vorath studied what little intelligence had been gathered about humanity. The reports painted a picture of a young and aggressive species that had spread across a handful of star systems near their homeworld. Their technology was inferior to Valori standards in almost every way. Their ships were slow and poorly armored. Their weapons were crude kinetic accelerators and primitive fusion missiles. Their population numbered in the billions, which was significant but not overwhelming. The only thing that gave Vorath pause was a note from the intelligence division about human psychology. The report mentioned that humans had an unusual resistance to despair and a tendency to fight even in hopeless situations. Vorath dismissed this as the desperate optimism of a doomed species. The Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and the gravitational shock waves from 800 ships, arriving at once rattled monitoring stations throughout the outer system. Vorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and surveyed the star system before him. His tactical officers began scanning for enemy vessels and defensive installations. "Report," he commanded. "Minimal defensive presence detected," his sensor officer replied. "Long-range stations on the outer planets, nothing of military significance. The main human fleet appears to be gathering near the gas giant in the inner system." "How many vessels?" 42 confirmed contacts, Grand Admiral. Mostly frigates and cruisers, with a handful of larger vessels that might be their equivalent of capital ships. Vorath allowed himself a thin smile. 42 ships against 800. This would not even qualify as a battle. It would be an execution. A communication signal came through from the inner system. Vorath ordered it displayed on the main screen. A human face appeared, stern and composed. It was not the same human who had met with Ambassador Thresikon, but it carried the same strange intensity in its eyes. "Valori Armada," the human said. "This is Terran Fleet Command. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. You have 60 minutes to reverse course and withdraw. This is your only warning." The bridge crew looked at each other in disbelief. Some of them actually laughed at the absurdity of the threat. Vorath did not bother to respond. He simply cut the transmission and ordered his fleet to advance. The two fleets met near the orbit of Jupiter, the largest planet in the Sol system. The Terran ships had arranged themselves in a defensive formation, their small vessels looking almost pitiful against the massive bulk of the Valori dreadnoughts. "All weapons, prepare to fire," Vorath ordered. "Target their capital ships first. End this quickly." But before his gunners could lock on to their targets, the Terran fleet fired first. The opening salvo was unlike anything Vorath had ever seen. The Terran ships launched projectiles at speeds that his sensors could barely track, fast-moving slugs that seemed to bend the light around them. Missiles streaked across the void, their exhaust trails burning with an intensity that suggested antimatter propulsion. And beams of focused energy lanced out from the Terran vessels, cutting through the darkness like blades of pure light. The first volley struck the forward elements of the Armada. Vorath watched in horror as ships that should have shrugged off the attack simply ceased to exist. The Terran projectiles punched through Valori shields as if they were made of paper. The missiles detonated with the fury of small suns, vaporizing everything within kilometers of their blast zones. The energy beams carved through armor plating that was supposed to be impenetrable. 73 Valori ships died in the first exchange. 73 vessels, each crewed by thousands of loyal soldiers, simply vanished in flashes of fire and debris. "Return fire!" Vorath screamed. "All ships, return fire now!" The Valori fleet unleashed its own weapons, plasma bolts and particle beams and guided missiles. But the Terran ships were no longer where they had been. They moved with impossible speed and agility, dancing through the incoming fire like leaves in a windstorm. Shots that should have been direct struck empty space as the human vessels jinked and weaved. And all the while, the Terrans kept shooting. The battle became a nightmare. Vorath had expected an easy victory, a simple demonstration of imperial power. Instead, he found himself in a desperate fight for survival against an enemy that refused to behave the way inferior species were supposed to behave. The Terran ships took hits. Some of them died. But for every human vessel destroyed, 10 Valori ships went up in flames. The humans absorbed punishment that would have crippled any other fleet, their ablative armor and redundant systems, keeping them in the fight long past the point where logic said they should have been destroyed. And when Terran ships finally reached the point of no return, their crews did not surrender or flee. They attacked. Vorath watched in disbelief as a burning Terran frigate, its engines failing and its hull breached in a dozen places, flew directly toward one of his carriers. The frigate crashed into the carrier's hangar bay at full speed and then detonated its remaining antimatter stores. The resulting explosion destroyed both vessels and damaged 3 more ships nearby. It was not an isolated incident. Again and again, dying Terran vessels made suicide runs at Valori ships, taking their enemies with them into oblivion. They overloaded reactors, rammed at maximum thrust, and detonated magazines in the middle of enemy formations. 4 hours after the battle began, Vorath ordered a retreat. He had arrived with 800 ships. He left with 187. More than 600 vessels had been destroyed or disabled, their crews killed or captured. It was the worst defeat in Valori military history. As the remnants of his fleet limped back toward Imperial space, Vorath sat alone in his quarters and composed his report to the Emperor. He described the battle in detail, holding nothing back about the catastrophic losses and the unexpected capabilities of human weapons. But at the end of his report, he included a single observation that would change everything the Empire thought it knew about the universe. "These humans do not fight like a species that fears death," he wrote. "They fight like a species that has learned to make death fear them. We underestimated them, and we paid the price. If we continue to underestimate them, they will destroy us all." The message reached Valor Prime, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the Empire knew doubt. The news of the Battle of Jupiter spread through the Empire like wildfire. For the first time in living memory, a Valori fleet had been defeated. Not just defeated, but utterly destroyed. Grand Admiral Vorath, one of the most celebrated commanders in Imperial history, had returned with less than a quarter of his ships and a look of haunted terror in his eyes. Emperor Keleth summoned his council of advisors and demanded explanations. "How is this possible?" he thundered from his throne. "How could a primitive species with inferior technology destroy 600 of our warships?" The advisors looked at each other nervously. None of them wanted to speak, because none of them had answers. Finally, an old scholar named Tessith stepped forward. She was the head of the Imperial Academy of Knowledge, and she had spent her life studying the various species of the galaxy. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I believe I may have some insight into what happened. But you will not like what I have to say." "Speak," the Emperor commanded. Tessith activated a holographic display that showed the blue and green planet called Earth. "We have been studying humanity since first contact," she began. "At first, we dismissed them as just another young species with delusions of importance. But the more we learned about them, the more disturbing the picture became." She changed the display to show a timeline of human history. Humans evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them. Their planet is geologically active, prone to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and sudden shifts in climate. The weather patterns are chaotic and unpredictable. The other life forms on their world competed with them for resources and actively hunted them as prey. "Many species face difficult conditions," the Emperor said dismissively. "That does not explain their military success." "With respect, Your Majesty, you do not understand," Tessith replied. "The Valori evolved on Valor Prime, a paradise world where food was plentiful and threats were minimal. We became dominant through our natural advantages, not through struggle. But humans had no natural advantages. They were not the strongest or fastest creatures on their planet. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor." She paused to let her words sink in. They survived through pure stubbornness and adaptability. When the environment changed, they changed with it. When predators hunted them, they learned to hunt the predators. When disease struck them down, they developed medicine. When resources ran short, they invented new ways to find more. Every challenge they faced made them stronger and more clever. The display changed again to show images of human warfare throughout history. And then there is this, Tessa said grimly. Humans have been fighting each other for their entire existence as a species. They have waged wars for territory, for resources, for ideology, for religion, and sometimes for no reason at all. They have developed weapons designed specifically to kill other humans with maximum efficiency. They have learned every trick and tactic imaginable for destroying intelligent beings. The council watched in silence as images of human conflicts flashed across the display, battles fought with swords and spears, with guns and cannons, with tanks and aircraft, with nuclear weapons and orbital platforms. 10,000 years of warfare, Tessa said. 10,000 years of killing each other and improving their methods. And during all that time, they were also advancing their technology at a rate that defies belief. 200 years ago, they could barely reach their own moon. Now they have faster than light travel, antimatter weapons, and energy systems that our scientists are still trying to understand. Emperor Keleth was silent for a long moment. You are telling me, he said slowly, that we have provoked a species of natural warriors who have spent their entire history perfecting the art of destruction. Yes, Your Majesty, Tessith confirmed. But there is more. Human psychology is fundamentally different from ours. When the Valerie face overwhelming odds, we calculate the probability of success and act rationally. If victory is impossible, we surrender or retreat. It is the logical thing to do. She looked directly at the Emperor. Humans do not think this way. When they face overwhelming odds, something in their minds activates. They call it different things: courage, determination, spite. But whatever it is, it makes them fight harder when they should be giving up. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation if they believe their deaths will serve a purpose. They will continue struggling long after any rational being would have accepted defeat. That is madness, one of the advisors muttered. Perhaps, Tessith agreed, but it is a madness that has allowed them to survive extinction-level events, colonize their home system, and destroy 600 of our warships. Our soldiers fight because they are trained and ordered to do so. Human soldiers fight because something in their very nature demands it. She deactivated the display and faced the council directly. I must be honest with you all, she said. We have awakened something dangerous. The humans were content to remain in their corner of the galaxy, exploring and expanding at their own pace. They had no interest in conquest or domination. But we threatened them, and now they are angry. What do you suggest we do? The Emperor asked. I suggest we negotiate, Tessa said. Offer them peace before this conflict escalates further. Accept that we made a mistake in approaching them as we did. The Emperor's golden eyes blazed with anger. The Valori Empire does not negotiate with lesser species, he growled. The Valori Empire does not make mistakes. The Valori Empire does not retreat. He stood from his throne, his robes billowing around him. If these humans want war, then they shall have war. Send word to all sectors. Mobilize the Imperial Core Fleet. I want 4,000 warships assembled and ready to march on Sol within the month. We will crush these creatures so thoroughly that their very existence will be forgotten. We will burn their worlds and scatter their ashes across the void. The advisors bowed and hurried to carry out his orders. Only Tessith remained, watching the Emperor with sad eyes. Your Majesty, she said quietly, I beg you to reconsider. This is not a war we can win easily. The cost will be terrible. The Emperor turned to face her, and there was no mercy in his expression. "The cost of defeat is greater," he replied. "I will not be the emperor who allowed the Valori to be humiliated by primitives. Whatever the price, we will pay it. Now go, and do not speak of negotiation again." Tessith bowed and withdrew. As she walked through the crystal corridors of the palace, she thought about everything she had learned about humanity. She thought about their history of survival and adaptation. She thought about their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. And she wondered if the Empire truly understood what it was about to face. While the Emperor assembled his grand fleet, humanity was not sitting idle. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the war room of Terran Fleet Command, surrounded by holographic displays showing the disposition of forces across known space. The victory at Jupiter had bought them time, but she knew it was only the beginning. The Empire would return with overwhelming force, and simple defense would not be enough. "We cannot wait for them to come to us," she told her commanders. "If we let them dictate the terms of this war, we will lose. We need to take the fight to them." General Marcus Chun, commander of the Terran Marine Corps, nodded in agreement. He was a grizzled veteran of colonial conflicts, with a scarred face and cold eyes that had seen too much death. "The problem is reach," he said. "Their territory is vast, and their fleet outnumbers ours by a factor of 20. Even with our technological advantages, we cannot win a straight-up fight against their full strength." "Then we do not fight straight up," Vasquez replied. "We fight smart." She gestured at the holographic map, and it zoomed out to show the full extent of Valori territory. "Intelligence has been busy while we were fighting at Jupiter. We have infiltrated their communication networks, mapped their hyperspace routes, and identified their critical infrastructure. And we have found something interesting." She highlighted 17 points scattered across the map. "Nexus stations," she explained. "The Valori faster-than-light network depends on these installations. They stabilize the hyperspace corridors that allow their ships to travel quickly across their territory. Without them, their fleet would be limited to slow and dangerous unassisted jumps that take months instead of days." The commanders leaned forward with interest. "If we destroy those stations," Chen said slowly, "their fleet becomes scattered and isolated. They cannot coordinate, cannot reinforce, cannot respond quickly to threats." "Exactly," Vasquez said. "And there is more. Intelligence reports that the Emperor is assembling a massive fleet to attack Sol. 4,000 ships, including a dozen planet-killing dreadnoughts. They are gathering at a staging point deep in their territory, preparing to use the Nexus network to jump directly to our doorstep." She smiled that predatory smile that her enemies had learned to fear. "But if the Nexus stations go down while they are in transit, they will be stranded in deep space with no way to reach us or return home. 4,000 ships, the pride of the Empire, trapped by the void." The room was silent as the implications sank in. "How do we hit 17 targets simultaneously across that much territory?" asked Admiral Tanaka, commander of the carrier fleet. "We do not need to hit all of them," Vasquez replied. 11 will be enough to collapse the network in the sectors between us and the core fleet. 40 strike groups, each built around a carrier and escort squadron. We launch coordinated attacks across the Empire at the same moment, before they even know we are coming." She looked around the room at her commanders. "This will not be easy. Many of our people will not come back. But if we succeed, we will break the back of the Valori military in a single stroke. We will show the galaxy that humanity is not prey to be hunted." General Chun stood at attention. "The Marines are ready," he said. "Just point us at the targets." One by one, the other commanders voiced their support. Operation Iron Tempest was born. 3 weeks later, 40 Terran strike groups departed Sol in complete radio silence. They traveled through uncharted space, using new hyperspace routes that Valori sensors could not detect. Each group carried Marines in powered combat armor, equipped with the deadliest weapons human engineering could produce. The attacks began at exactly the same moment, coordinated to the second across light years of distance. At Nexus Station 7, Captain Sarah Rodriguez led her Marines through the outer defenses in a blaze of gunfire and explosions. The Valori guards had never faced human soldiers in close combat before. They were unprepared for the speed and violence of the assault. Human Marines fought like demons. Their powered armor made them faster and stronger than any unaugmented being. Their weapons fired high-velocity rounds that punched through Valori body armor like paper. They moved through the station's corridors with ruthless efficiency, clearing rooms and taking objectives with a precision that came from decades of training and centuries of military evolution. Within 2 hours, Station 7 was in human hands. The surviving Valori were taken prisoner, treated with unexpected decency, and secured in holding areas while demolition teams planted charges throughout the facility. Similar scenes played out across the Empire. At Station 12, Commander James Wright led a boarding action against fierce resistance. His Marines fought hand-to-hand in zero-gravity conditions, using magnetic boots and handheld thrusters to maneuver through spinning debris and weapons fire. They suffered heavy casualties, but never wavered. At Station 4, the Valori attempted to self-destruct the facility rather than let it fall into human hands. A quick-thinking engineer named Lisa Park managed to override the destruct sequence with seconds to spare, earning herself a medal and a promotion. At Station 19, the assault went badly wrong when Valori reinforcements arrived unexpectedly. The Marines found themselves trapped between enemy forces closing in from 2 directions. Instead of surrendering, they fortified their position and held out for 6 hours until relief forces could arrive. When the dust settled, 11 Nexus stations had been destroyed or captured. The Valori hyperspace network collapsed across half their territory, and the Imperial Core Fleet, 4,000 ships carrying the might of the Empire, found itself stranded in the emptiness between stars. Admiral Vorath, who had been given a second chance to prove himself as part of the core fleet, watched his navigation displays go dark as the Nexus network failed. Around him, 4,000 ships drifted helplessly, unable to reach their destination or return home. "What do we do now?" his first officer asked, his voice trembling with fear. Vorath did not answer. He simply stared at the empty void outside his window and thought about what the scholar, Tessith, had said about human adaptability. Back on Earth, Admiral Vasquez received confirmation that Operation Iron Tempest had succeeded. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before turning to the next phase of the plan. "The Empire's fleet is neutralized," she announced. "But the war is not over. The Valori still have ships, still have resources, still have the will to fight. We need to keep the pressure on, liberate their subject species, and show the galaxy that the age of imperial tyranny is ending." She looked at the map of Valori space, at the dozens of worlds groaning under imperial rule. "Send word to all commands," she ordered. "The Terran fleet advances. We are taking the fight to their doorstep." And so the hounds of humanity were unleashed upon the stars. Emperor Keleth watched his empire crumble from the windows of his palace. Every day brought news of fresh disasters. The core fleet remained stranded in deep space, its crews growing desperate as supplies dwindled. Human strike forces raided imperial installations at will, appearing without warning and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. And worst of all, the subject species were beginning to rebel. For 12,000 years, the Valori had ruled through fear. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and forced their populations into servitude with the threat of total annihilation. Those species had accepted their fate because they believed resistance was impossible. But now they had seen the humans defeat Valori fleets. They had heard stories of human marines fighting with impossible courage. They had received transmissions from Terran commanders promising support to any world that rose against their oppressors. The first rebellion occurred on Kethros Prime, a mining world whose people had labored in darkness for 3,000 years. The Kethrosi were a small and timid species, easily cowed by Valori violence. But when a human supply ship arrived in their system carrying weapons and a promise of protection, something changed. The Kethrosi rose up against their masters in the middle of the night. By dawn, every Valori overseer on the planet was dead or in chains. The rebellion spread to neighboring worlds within days. Similar uprisings erupted across the Empire. Species that had never shown a spark of defiance suddenly found their courage. They sabotaged Imperial facilities, attacked garrison forces, and welcomed human liberators with open arms. The Valori military tried to respond, but their forces were stretched too thin. With the core fleet gone and the Nexus network in ruins, they could not bring overwhelming force to bear on any single problem. Every time they crushed one rebellion, 3 more appeared elsewhere. 6 months after the Battle of Jupiter, a Terran fleet entered orbit above Valor Prime. Emperor Keleth stood on the balcony of his throne room and looked up at the sky. Human ships hung above his world like a constellation of judgment, their weapons charged and ready. The planetary defense grid was intact, but his advisors had informed him that it would not be enough to stop the invaders. Admiral Vasquez's face appeared on every screen in the palace, her image broadcast across the entire planet. "Emperor Keleth," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Your fleets are broken. Your stations are ash. Your subject peoples have chosen freedom over fear. This war ends today, one way or another." She paused to let her words sink in. "You may surrender and face judgment for your crimes against sentient life. Your people will be treated with dignity. Your world will not be harmed, and the transition to a new order will be peaceful. Or you may resist and we will do what humanity has always done to tyrants." Her eyes seemed to look directly at the Emperor through the screen. "We will end you." Keleth turned away from the balcony and faced his council. His advisors and generals stood in clusters, their faces showing various shades of fear and defiance. "Your Majesty," said General Desak, commander of the planetary garrison, "we still have weapons. The ancient defense systems beneath the palace are capable of destroying entire continents. We could activate them, threaten to burn our own world if the humans do not withdraw." "That would be madness," Tessith said quietly. She had remained at court despite her earlier warnings being ignored. The humans would not believe such a bluff. And if it is not a bluff, then we would be destroying ourselves despite our enemies. "Then what do you suggest?" Desak demanded. "Should we simply surrender? Should we give up everything our ancestors built? Should we bow to these creatures who were crawling in mud when our empire was young?" "Yes," Tessith said. "That is exactly what we should do. We lost this war at the moment we decided to fight it. The humans were never our enemies until we made them so. Perhaps if we show them that we can learn from our mistakes, they will show us mercy." "Mercy?" Desak spat the word like a curse. "The Valori do not need mercy from lesser beings. The Valori need to survive," Tessith replied. "And survival sometimes requires humility." The Emperor listened to the argument in silence. His golden eyes moved from face to face, reading the fear and pride and desperation of his advisors. Finally, he spoke. "Tessith is correct," he said quietly. The room fell silent. "I was proud," Keleth continued. "I believed that our history gave us the right to rule, that our power made us superior, that no species could ever challenge us. I was wrong." He walked slowly toward his throne, his steps heavy with the weight of 12,000 years. "The humans did not defeat us because they were stronger or more numerous. They defeated us because they were willing to do whatever was necessary to survive. They adapted. They evolved. They refused to accept the fate we intended for them. He reached the throne and placed his hand on its arm, feeling the cool crystal beneath his fingers. We could have been allies. We could have learned from each other. Instead, I threw away the lives of millions of my people because I could not accept that a young species might be our equal. He turned to face his council. That pride ends now. Humanity has won. We will surrender. We will face judgment, and we will hope that they are more merciful than we would have been. Caliph reached up and removed the crown from his head. It was an ancient artifact, worn by every emperor for 12,000 years. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, and then set it down on the throne. "Send word to the human fleet," he said. "The Valori Empire surrenders." The Treaty of Soul was signed aboard the TFS Defiance 1 week later. Emperor Caliph signed as the representative of the Valori, his hand steady despite the humiliation. The empire was dissolved. The subject species were granted independence. War criminals would face trial, and humanity took its place among the great powers of the galaxy. At the signing ceremony, a Valori journalist asked Admiral Vasquez how humanity had managed to defeat an empire that had ruled for 12,000 years. Vasquez considered the question for a moment before answering. "You looked at us and saw prey," she said. "A small species on a small world with primitive technology and limited resources. You thought we would be easy to conquer, easy to break, easy to add to your collection of subjects." She smiled that smile that had launched 1,000 ships. "That was your first mistake. We are not prey. We have never been prey. We are the species that looked at a universe trying to kill us and said, 'Not today.' We survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and plagues and wars. We crawled out of every disaster stronger than before. And when you came to threaten us, we did what we have always done." She leaned forward. "We fought back. And we won." The journalist had no response. Outside the windows of the conference room, the stars burned cold and bright. And somewhere among them, the children of Earth looked up at the endless sky and dreamed of the future they would build among the stars.